All right, so I'm sure everybody has at least heard about Katt Williams' appearance on Shannon Sharpe's podcast. This went insanely viral. Everybody's been talking about it. It did 12 million views in one day. So this might have been one of the biggest podcasts ever, possibly. And it's because Katt Williams did not hold back, and he spent basically the whole podcast calling people out, like Kevin Hart, Steve Harvey, Cedric the Entertainer, and a ton of other people, and it was just hilarious to watch.
I'm just saying I can't let these dudes lie. Cedric's sitting here telling you why he ain't a movie star. He over here look like a walrus. You didn't say nothing. He can't even get his arms off his stomach sitting over here. Why I'm not a movie star. What?
It's a situation.
He never wrote anything. Remember, when Cedric the Entertainer starts, he's supposed to be singing, dancing, and telling jokes. That's why he's called the Entertainer.
Right.
We found out he can't sing, can't dance, and doesn't write jokes. He did 4 comedy specials. They're so bad, Shannon, they're not available on Netflix or Tubi. Can I say that again for the audience? They're so bad that they're not available on Netflix or Tubi.
You don't think Sam's a good comedian?
The world doesn't think that, sir. I have 12 comedy specials.
Yeah, so he was on fire. He was roasting everybody, and he even got to Joe Rogan. He briefly mentioned him and his group of comedians, which of course caught a lot of people's attention, even Joe's attention. You know, he ended up responding to this, which we'll get to. But first I want to play the clip here.
If you were a comedian that cussed, you were ridiculed by the mainstream comedy geist. That would be like me being on Joe Rogan. Joe don't want me on there. I need to be on Shannon. Joe got 6 comedians that never been funny. He want to push out. But that's really how it is.
Yeah, so he's definitely right about Joe promoting unfunny comedians. But, I mean, Joe himself isn't the best comedian, so what do you really expect? It is hilarious, though, that Katt mentioned this on a podcast with 12 million views, and this clip was shared all over the place. And more people are starting to realize that because of podcasting, Joe's group of friends became way more successful than they ever really should have been. And I don't know if Katt was just throwing out a random number or if he had 6 specific comedians in mind here, but I'm sure people could probably guess he was thinking of Brendan Schaub at least, or maybe Bert Kreischer or Tom Segura, or even possibly Andrew Schultz. Because now I think those guys, at least Bert, Tom, and Brendan, are starting to realize there's only so much Joe could do. You know, going on his podcast is not what he used to be. You don't get the same boost. And Joe's audience is already well aware of them, so it's not like they're going on there to get a new audience. Everyone knows who they are, so they had their opportunity, and it seemed like they just got to a point where they were content on coasting, and now it's not going very well for them. And it's funny because even though Katt Williams was roasting them, I'm sure they saw the views that this podcast got, and they're just thinking, damn, I need to get him on my show. Like next week, we'll probably hear Brendan Schaub mention that him and Katt are best friends and they talk on the phone every day, and he's going to be coming on the show soon, which I would love to see, but obviously that's never happening. Also, Katt mentioned in the beginning of the Shannon Sharpe one that he doesn't really like doing podcast appearances, and he'll only go on them if it's somebody that he really respects or if he needs to respond to something. But hopefully we'll see him on the Joe Rogan Experience, because Joe responded to that clip and he said, I love Katt. He's one of my favorite comics and I'd love to have him on. We talk about him all the time. If he's down, I'll make it happen. So that'd be really interesting to see. And I give Joe credit for inviting him on because, you know, usually he doesn't respond to that kind of stuff. If somebody calls him out and his friends, he usually just ignores it. And it seems like he doesn't really like to get involved in comedians trash talking each other. So I'm kind of surprised that he responded to this. But also I did see people mention that maybe he's thinking of the views he could get from it. And obviously he doesn't really need it, but I think this might be the last year of his Spotify contract. So something like this could definitely help with the next contract that he gets. But also, you know, he is a big fan of Katt. He does talk about how much he loves his comedy and everything. Like, he was just talking about how funny Katt is around a month ago when Stavros was on his podcast. They watched a part from one of his specials, and they're also talking about this interview he did. And it sounded like Joe to have him on. So even before he called him out, I think Joe was open to it. But he probably just never invited him because maybe he figured he never wanted to do it, which I don't think Katt really does. I don't think we'll see him on there. Like, when he called Joe out on Shannon's podcast, I think he's mostly doing that just to take a shot at Joe and make a joke about him and his friend group. Because in that interview, he was doing that with basically every comedian. And obviously Joe is one of the top ones. so you got to take a shot at him. But it's hard to tell how closely he actually follows the Rogan sphere and what he actually thinks of these people. Like, I couldn't find any other times where he's talked shit about them at all, but I did find this one clip where he's talking about cancel culture, which is obviously a big talking point on Joe's podcast, and a lot of his friends like to complain about it. And he basically said it doesn't exist. And he's like, even when these comedians could say whatever they want, they still weren't very funny.
Some of these things are for the benefit of everything. Nobody likes the speed limit, but it's necessary. Nobody likes the shoulder of the road, but it's there for a reason. Mm-hmm. My point is, people weren't all that extremely funny back when they could say whatever they wanted to say. At the end of the day, there's no cancel culture. Cancellation doesn't have its own culture. I don't know what people we think got canceled that we wish we had back. I don't even know who are they. It's done for the reasons it's done for, and it helped who it helped. I'm saying your job as a comedian is to please the most amount of people with your art. So if you want to offend somebody, nobody took those words away from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's definitely taking some shots at Joe Rogan and his group of friends, because obviously they're known for complaining about cancel culture a lot and how it's destroying comedy, even though in reality it's only helped most of these comedians. You know, Shane Gillis, he's at least smart enough to realize that. I think he would definitely admit it. That's why when Joe brings it up around him, he doesn't like to talk about it. But, you know, Joe, I don't know if he'll ever realize this. I mean, just the other day, this is what he was saying.
We say, you know, in the comedy world, we say we're the last line of defense, because this is where the woke meets the wall. The woke meets the wall with stand-up comedy.
Yeah, so if you guys ever go see stand-up, make sure you thank the comedian for their service. There's only 1,000 of them. You know, you got to appreciate them. I mean, how does Joe say this with a straight face? This is hilarious. And also, to Katt Williams' point, what comedian was actually canceled to where it destroyed their career? You know, obviously there are comedians that did some illegal stuff and they deserve to be canceled, but what comedian told a joke and then it destroyed their career? Like, think about the comedians that people point to prove that cancel culture is real. You know, Tony Hinchcliffe, he got some shit a few years ago. Now this year, he's doing Kill Tony at Madison Square Garden. Shane Gillis, you could say he got canceled. Now he's the biggest comedian alive. And then also Dave Chappelle with his Netflix special a couple years ago. You know, people are trying to cancel him. And obviously, I think those people are soft and they're way too sensitive. But did those people really do anything other than just help promote his special? Because Dave Chappelle just had another Netflix special and he made more trans jokes. So obviously, Netflix doesn't care very much. And I can't really think of anybody else. You know, obviously people like Chris D'Elia, but that's a whole nother story. And Joe hasn't even had him on his podcast since then. And I don't think he's ever talked about him or defended him. So it sounds like he doesn't really mind him being canceled. But if cancel culture is so bad for comedy, how come there's more comedians now than ever selling out arenas? You know, I think it only helped comedy, to be honest, because now people think comedians are more important than they really are, like Joe's talking about right there. And, you know, now comedians are trying to get canceled. Like we saw with Matt Rife with his newest special, he was 100% trying to get canceled. So it's like a badge of honor at this point. And the comedians that cry about being censored or they can't say what they want, they can't make the jokes that they want, they're just so full of it. You know, like Brendan Schaub, he'll talk about how he's being shadow banned because they don't like what he's saying. I mean, dude, you wish that was going on. Like, now comedians can just use it as an excuse if they're not doing well. It's like, oh, you know, people hate me. It's cancel culture. It's just so ridiculous. So I hope Katt Williams goes on Joe's podcast, even though obviously he wouldn't be the best person to bring this up to Joe because he's always crying about the Illuminati and stuff like that. But either way, you know, that would be an insanely entertaining podcast, and I hope it happens because he's obviously not afraid to call people out. And there are a lot of people that are part of the whole Rogan sphere that need to be called out, that need a reality check. And, you know, Katt Williams, it's not like he has anything to lose. Like, the guy doesn't need Joe's approval. He doesn't need Joe's podcast to promote himself. Like, he'd be doing Joe a favor by going on there. So he's going to tell Joe whatever he thinks. And it's funny because he has a completely different mindset than Joe when it comes to comedy. You know, Joe wants to uplift every other comedian and be friends with them and everything. Katt Williams, he looks at it like a competition, and he's not afraid to call other people out.
Why would we tell these ridiculous stories? Because it's competition. You feel like, well, why comedy guys can't just get along?
Yes.
Why didn't you get along with the other teams you were competing against? If you're a Denver Bronco, why you don't get along with the Cowboys? Something wrong with you?
Yeah, so let's hope that this podcast happens. It would be awesome. especially if he brings up Andrew Schultz. I'd love to hear what he has to say about him, because I think Andrew Schultz is one of the biggest grifters in comedy right now. If you want to hear more about that, I just made a 40-minute Patreon video talking about it. You know, speaking of comedians that cry about cancel culture, he is one of the prime examples of that. So if you guys are interested, make sure you go check it out. I'll put a link in the description. There are also 50 other videos on there, so there's a ton of content to go through. If you like this channel, check it out, link in the description, and then hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you at the next video.